Hi friends, Jeanette here with Vivo Vintage Designs. Today I'm going to show you how I painted this watercolor carnation. So as you see, I printed out an image that I liked. I found it on Unsplash. I scribbled some pencil on the back, laid it over my watercolor paper, and then I traced it. But because when you trace it like this, the lines are kind of fuzzy, I like to take a mechanical pencil and define my lines. So that's what you see me doing here. Now, I am often asked why I don't do tutorials on my more detailed watercolor paintings. And to be honest, the reason that I haven't done it is because it takes a really long time and I record using my phone. At some point, I would like to upgrade to a good camera that I can videotape with, but for now, this is what I have. So it takes a really long time, and trying to explain it is even more difficult. But I'm going to do my best because you asked for it, so I'm going to give it to you. Now I'm working on a block of Arches 100% cotton watercolor paper. And the reason I'm using a block is because that means that I don't have to stretch the paper. It also means that the sheets are glued together around all four sides, and there's a small opening where you can stick a palette knife once you're finished with your painting, and you can remove that sheet from the others. I like using this when I'm going to use the wet and wet technique, which is how I will be painting this entire flower for the most part. So I'm going to speed through this. I don't think you want to see me retrace this entire painting, or rather carnation. So let's speed this up a little bit and get to the good stuff. Okay, so I have finished tracing the flower, and you can see how much more clear the lines are. And I know this sounds crazy, but now I'm using a kneadable eraser to lighten those lines a little bit. Now the reason I'm doing that is because once you paint over them with watercolor, it's very difficult and near impossible to remove the pencil lines. So my eyesight is not that great, so I'm going to leave a little of the pencil line. I'm not going to erase it too much, just so that I can see what I'm doing. And I use a kneadable eraser because it's less damaging to the paper. If you use an eraser where you have to scrub back and forth, it can damage the paper, and the paper won't accept the paint the same as it will on a section that's not been damaged. So a kneadable eraser is wonderful because you can just roll it or pat it on the paper, and it lifts a lot of the pencil marks. And it doesn't leave any of that pencil dust, as I call it. Now that I've finished tracing the carnation, I'm ready to select the colors I will use for this painting. And I'm trying to keep it to a limited palette. I don't want to have too many colors. I want to keep this simple. So I'm pulling out a few colors. Some I may use and others I will not. But first I'm going to swatch them out before I make any decisions. And usually what I do is I use a pencil to write down the names of the colors, because if I ever want to do this painting again, I want to know what colors I used. It's a whole process for me. And once I decide what colors I want to use, I can easily erase this. So now I'm swatching out the colors, and the colors that I've selected are Perylene Green, that will be my darkest green, green gold, sap green, opera rose, quin red, quin magenta, and now I'm fiddling with the opera rose because I think it's too bright of a pink. So I mixed a little bit of the green gold just to tone it down a little bit, because red and green are opposites. If you add just a little bit, it will tone it down. So I've added a little bit to the opera rose, and I do like the color. You can see here just the opera rose on its own is too bright. So I add just a little bit more of the opera rose to my mix, and I'm ready to get started. And the paints that I'm using are Winsor & Newton professional paints. I don't know if I mentioned that earlier. So now for the next step, what I'm going to do is I am going to dilute that color that I mixed together, and I'm going to fill the entire flower with this color. And looking at this now that I'm doing the voiceover, I think I should have diluted it a little bit more, but in just a moment you'll see how I remedy that. I do add a little bit more water to my brush so that it dilutes the color as I'm putting it down, but I'm going to lift out my highlights, and I'll show you that in just a moment. Alright, so I'm nearly finished painting in the entire flower with the opera rose and green gold. Now I'm going to use a paintbrush, a damp, clean paintbrush, to lift up some of that paint so that I keep my highlight areas. And later I'll use an eradicator brush by Rosemary & Co. I just purchased 3 of them, and these are great because they're flat brushes and the bristles are a little bit stiffer, and it makes cleaning up edges or lifting very, very easy. And there's a couple of areas where I went over my pencil line, and I'm going to use the eradicator brush for that. The brushes that I'm using for this painting are silver black velvet brushes. Those are my favorite. So you can see how easily this is, how easy it is to lift this and bring back my highlighted areas. I'm just wiggling the brush and then using the paper towel to dab it so it helps lift a little bit better. Now, if you don't have the eradicator brushes, you can just use a simple synthetic brush, a flat synthetic brush. That will do the trick as well. Just be careful not to scrub the paper too much. So these are the 3 brushes that I used. That I bought, and I'm going to use the smallest one to clean up the edges where I went over the pencil line. Now you can see that I have already started filling in my petals, and I'm using the wet and wet technique, and what that means is that I am working on each petal individually, and I am wetting down the surface of the entire petal. And while the paper is still wet, first I let it dry for just a little bit, and by dry I mean I allow the paper to absorb the water, because it gives me more control and allows my colors to stay where I put them, but it gives me soft edges. So if you wet down your paper and you put too much water down and then you try to add your paint, what's going to happen is that the paint will spread all over that petal. So in order to have some control, I let the paper dry just a little bit, and that allows me to add the color where I want it, and it will bloom out a little bit, but it'll just give me soft edges and allow me to place the color where I want it to be. And that's going to be the process for this entire painting. Now I did add a little bit of the quinacridone magenta to my palette because I wanted to have areas that I see in my reference photo that are darker. So I thought the magenta was a good addition. And I'm also using a combination of brushes. They're all silver black velvet, but some of them are detail brushes, which are wonderful because they really allow you to get into all those little tight corners. And when you're using the wet and wet technique, be sure not to work on one petal, or rather a petal next to the petal that you just finished. Because if your petal, the first petal is still wet and you work on one right next to it, what will happen is that because they're both wet, the paint will run into one another. I hope that makes sense. Try and work on petals that are not touching. That's why you see me skipping around. Now here's one of those little detail brushes by Silver Black Velvet, and these are fantastic. And you can see that as I'm putting down my paint, it's staying where I place it. And if I need to soften up the edges a little bit, I can easily do that by cleaning my brush, wiping it on my paper towel, and just swiping over that edge and blending it in. And make sure to keep looking back at your reference photo so that you can see where the shadows are and where your highlights are. So I have mine right in front of me, and I keep going right back to it. Also, I do have two little pots of water, one with clean water and one that I use to clean the brush. And the reason I do that is because I'm using a lot of pink and the water will get dirty very quickly. So once I clean my brush off in the first pot, I rinse it off in the clean water. And that way I'm not transferring the dirty water onto my painting. And I switch it out, or rather I clean it out and use fresh water often. Now here I think I went a little bit too dark, so you can see that I'm using a clean damp brush to try and lift some of that paint off. Can you guys hear Diesel snoring? He's too much. As you can see, I have added color to a few petals, and I'm continuing around the flower, doing each petal individually and adding a little bit more color. So this is layer number 2. There'll probably be a 3 and a 4 also. So now when I work on a painting, a watercolor painting that is detailed like this one, I never finish a painting in one sitting. Number 1, I don't have that kind of time. Number 2, my eyes start to hurt. And number 3, I find most importantly that when I walk away from the painting and go do something else, when I come back to it, I have fresh eyes and I can see things that I wasn't able to see before. And that's really important to me. So coming back, I do chores in between, a load of laundry, mopping, dusting, dishes, cooking, all that kind of stuff, taking Diesel out for the 50th time in one day. So every time I come back and I look at the painting, I see where I may need to add more or maybe lift something. So I find it really helpful. And these paintings do take a while. So that's why you hardly ever see one of these detailed paintings on my YouTube channel. I usually post beginner-friendly videos with watercolor. But I am going to try to add more videos like this with more detailed paintings. So I'm pretty satisfied with the way my petals look right now. I may go back later and add a little bit more detail or a little bit more shadow. But right now I'm working on what is the scariest part of this painting for me, the receptacle. I'm not sure how I'm going to go about it, but I'm going to start out with some lemon yellow. I've wet down the entire area of the receptacle, and now I'm just dropping in a very diluted lemon yellow. And then I think I'm going to use a detail brush to add lines because that's what I see, but not sure how it's going to turn out. So let's watch and see what happens. Now I have had to speed up this video, but if I'm going too fast, you can always slow it down on your end. But this painting has taken me a couple of days to do, so I had to speed it up, otherwise you'd be watching me for hours. And while you may enjoy my channel, I'm sure you have other things to do. So you can see here, I'm starting with the perylene green, and I've got the detail brush, and I'm just painting these small lines and trying to keep it darker at the top, but I don't want to go too dark too soon. So I've diluted the color a little bit. And I keep walking away and coming back, walking away and coming back, because I'm not sure if my idea on how to go about this is going to work. So let's continue watching and see what happens. So I've continued to add lines using the colors I mentioned earlier. And I'm pretty happy with the way this is looking, especially since I wasn't sure how I was going to go about it. But sometimes you've got to put that fear out of your head. It's just paper and paint, and go for it. And sometimes you get lucky. Finally, the end is near. I am now painting my last sepal. And you can see, as I did with the entire painting, I'm using the wet and wet technique. So I'm wetting down that section, and now I'm dropping a little bit of lemon yellow in there. And I noticed in the reference photo that the sepals looked as though almost like there was a texture to them. So as I applied my paint, I tried to recreate that by using the tip of the brush to deposit the color onto the paper. And you'll see in just a moment what I mean. So you can see I'm just tapping it in with the tip of the brush instead of moving it around too much. I'm trying to create the same effect, and after a couple of layers, I think it turned out really well and very similar to the reference photo. Now I'm dropping in the perylene green, and I notice in the reference photo that there is a highlight in the middle of that sepal. So I am going to try very hard to preserve that highlight. So as you watch me paint this, I know it was a little difficult to explain what I was doing because I did it in 3 days. But if you have any questions about anything that you've seen me do here, leave it in the comments. I'll always get back to you. I'm always happy to answer your questions. And all the products will be listed in the description box where you will find the title just below the video. Click on Show More or the arrow pointing down, and the list will expand. And I'm using Winsor & Newton professional paints, and I buy these in individual tubes whenever I go somewhere. So they won't be listed in the description box, but I will have other alternatives if you're just beginning with watercolor that are good options for the beginner. And please don't forget to like, comment, and consider subscribing. Your interaction with my channel is really helpful, and it's a wonderful way to show your support, and I really do appreciate it. So we're getting close to the end here. You can see I've preserved that little highlight in the center. And now I'm just softening up the edge, making it blend a little bit softer. And stick around till the end. I'll post a picture of the completed painting so that you can see it clearly. So again, just using the tip of the brush and just dabbing the paint in, almost dotting it in to get that textured look. And that's it. It's finished. Thank you so much for watching. I will see you in the next one. Bye.